I'm a billionaire CEO, and tonight, I'm all yours. Don't get jealous. My kids are with others. Elias Thornwood wore his billionaire status like a second skin, smooth, refined, and untouchable. At just 35, he was the CEO of Thornwood Enterprises, a global empire of glass and steel that dominated industries across continents. The financial world hailed him as a prodigy, pointing to his trail of successful acquisitions and ruthless market strategies as proof of his unmatched brilliance. But behind the glitz and glamour of his public persona, a darker rumor followed him like a shadow. Elias Thornwood believed relationships were obstacles, but children were assets. "I'll be with you tonight," he was rumored to say with a cold half-smile. "But don't be jealous if I have kids with other women. I plan on having several." Some dismissed it as tabloid gossip, but others whispered it was the truth. A truth that made him both fascinating and terrifying. On a sweltering Monday morning in Manhattan, Amara Vale stepped into the towering lobby of Thornwood Tower, clutching a sleek portfolio under her arm. It was her first day as a senior project manager for the company's new philanthropic initiative. She had studied Thornwood Enterprises inside and out, its annual reports, investor calls, and market strategies, but nothing prepared her for the eerie hush that fell whenever Elias Thornwood's name was mentioned. The rumors about his personal life swirled in her mind. Could a man so successful really treat fatherhood like a business strategy? Her introduction to Elias came sooner than expected. Before lunch, he was summoned to his corner office on the top floor. The elevator opened to a reception area of gleaming marble and minimalist decor, guarded by a discreet assistant. Beyond the wall of glass, the city sprawled like a kingdom, a reminder that Elias Thornwood ruled this domain. Heart racing, Amara stepped into his office, bracing herself for the cold, calculating billionaire she'd heard about. Instead, she found a man seated behind a dark glass desk, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. He wore a tailored suit with effortless ease, but there was something in his gaze, a flicker of curiosity that caught her off guard. "Miss Vale," he greeted with a subdued down. "I understand you'll be leading our new philanthropic efforts. Welcome to Thornwood." His voice was softer than she expected, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "Thank you, Mr. Thornwood," Amara replied, forcing confidence into her tone. "I'm eager to align your philanthropic goals with outcomes that benefit both the community and the company." She set her portfolio on the desk, ready to present her ideas. But instead of diving into her plans, he studied her face as if searching for something deeper. "We don't do long-term commitments here," he said, his tone casual but loaded with meaning. "That's what sets us apart from other corporations." Amara met his gaze, refusing to back down. "If we want real change, we might need deeper commitments. Isn't that the point of philanthropy?" For a moment, he seemed to weigh her words, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Spoken like someone who believes in real bonds," he murmured. "Let's see if this initiative can do more than just score PR points." As Amara left his office, she couldn't shake the feeling that Elias Thornwood was guarding a secret, one that might unravel everything she thought she knew about him. Amara had survived her first meeting with Elias Thornwood without encountering the cold, calculating man rumored to father children across the globe. Yet a subtle tension lingered in the air, a sense that he was hiding something, and that the whispers about his personal life might hold more truth than he let on. As she walked down the hallway, staffers flashed polite smiles, but Amara sensed they were studying her, perhaps wondering how quickly she'd adapt to the strange world of a CEO who treated fatherhood like a business strategy rather than a lifelong commitment. That night, over a modest dinner in her new apartment, Amara replayed the day's events. She was unsettled by how normal Elias had seemed. No lecherous remarks, no brazen references to multiple children. Was the rumor just nonsense, or was he simply too skilled at maintaining a facade? She decided not to let gossip cloud her judgment. After all, she prided herself on forming opinions based on direct observation, not hearsay. Still, she couldn't shake a nagging curiosity about the man behind that polished, purposeful exterior. Across town, high in his penthouse, Elias Thornwood stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights flicker below. He tossed his phone onto the couch, ignoring the flood of texts from acquaintances, some intimate, some opportunistic. His vow to remain unattached hadn't wavered, nor had his approach to fatherhood. Yet, for the first time in years, his thoughts drifted to the new hire, Amara Vale, the woman who spoke about deeper commitments with a conviction he found both naive and strangely admirable. He reminded himself not to dwell on it. Tomorrow he'd dive back into acquisitions, hush money, and the labyrinth of emotional disclaimers that kept him from forming any lasting ties. But that night, sleep eluded him. As he listened to the hum of the city, a small flicker of something unfamiliar stirred within him, anticipation, or perhaps a faint unease that his carefully constructed world was on the brink of change. The morning after her introductory meeting with Elias, Amara rose early and arrived at Thornwood Tower before most employees had even finished their commutes. She was determined to map out her philanthropic campaign strategies without interruption. Yet as she passed the sleek reception desk and caught her reflection in the mirrored walls, her mind drifted back to the unsettling rumors about her new boss. Did Elias Thornwood really have multiple mothers and children scattered across the globe? It seemed like an exaggeration, but beneath the gossip lay a faint echo of truth that made her uneasy. Still, her priority was the philanthropic rollout, not her CEO's personal life, no matter how bizarre or unethical it might seem. She took the elevator to the 40th floor and stepped into a sprawling, open-plan workspace. The office was quiet, save for the hum of distant ventilation and the occasional clatter of keyboards from a handful of early risers in glass-walled cubicles. Settling at a desk near a bank of tall windows, Amara spread out her notes on corporate giving trends and regional community needs. She focused on analyzing which organizations would benefit most from Thornwood's resources, how brand synergy could be maximized, and how to preempt accusations that the firm was merely virtue signaling. Tapping intently on her tablet, she lost track of time until a shadow fell across her desk. Looking up, she saw a tall, broad-shouldered man with a kind smile. It was Noah Pierce, the firm's operations manager, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "I heard we have an early bird here," he joked, setting 1 cup on her desk. "Figured you might need a little caffeine." His easy manner put her at ease instantly. As she accepted the coffee, she realized he'd guessed her order perfectly. Black, no sugar. "Thanks," she said, returning his smile. Noah gave her a quick rundown of the office culture, explaining that most employees were talented but wary of taking initiative in philanthropic work. "They know Mr. Thornwood's approach to personal matters is unconventional," he said carefully, "and that brand image is a delicate subject. People prefer to let the CEO do what he wants and keep quiet." Amara nodded, sensing the unspoken tension in his words. She was about to ask more when her phone buzzed with a message from Elias's assistant. "Mr. Thornwood requests your presence in his office. Urgent. No questions." He'd guessed her order perfectly. Black coffee, no sugar. "Thanks," she murmured, returning his friendly grin. Julian Hart gave her a quick briefing on the office culture, explaining that most employees were talented but wary about taking initiative in philanthropic work. "They know Mr. Thornwood's approach to personal matters is unconventional," he said carefully, "and that brand image has become a delicate subject. People preferred to let the CEO do what he wants and keep quiet. Amara nodded, gleaning how the environment thrived on hush-hush acceptance rather than open discourse. She was about to press Julian for more insights when an internal message popped onto her screen, summoning her to a brief check-in with Elias Thornwood. Surprise fluttered in her chest. She had expected him to be aloof, not scheduling back-to-back meetings with a subordinate so soon. Finishing her coffee, she made her way upstairs to the executive floor, where the stark hush felt even more pronounced than the day before. Through the glass partitions, she could see Elias leaning over some documents, his posture tense. His assistant motioned Amara in with a gesture of encouragement. Inside, he greeted her with a nod, the lines of fatigue under his eyes more pronounced. "Morning, Miss Vale," he said softly, scanning her face as though searching for an intangible clue. He gestured to a seat. "I wanted to discuss your philanthropic plan in more detail, specifically the optics. I've been hearing that certain board members worry it's too moralistic. They prefer a short-term approach with splashy headlines, not a deep, multi-year commitment that could weigh down profit margins." Amara felt a flicker of both frustration and resolve. "I've prepared alternative proposals for them, ones that map incremental giving and brand synergy. But Mr. Thornwood, if you want lasting impact, quick charity stunts won't suffice." She forced a calm she didn't fully feel. Every conversation with him carried undercurrents of tension. She recalled how last night she'd gleaned from coworkers that he rarely repeated dates with the same woman, that hush money and NDAs formed the backbone of his paternal obligations. Yet here he was, speaking as though he might indeed desire something more meaningful in philanthropic spheres. The contradiction piqued her curiosity and unsettled her moral compass. He leaned back in his leather chair, arms folded. "I respect your perspective, but you need to understand, in this company, longevity in any arrangement, be it philanthropic or personal, carries risks. People get attached. Expectations grow. And if the results waver, it all collapses." His tone was measured, but the words smoldered with a personal subtext. It sounded less like a standard business stance and more like a man rationalizing the avoidance of deeper ties. Amara felt her heart pound a beat faster. Risk is inherent in real transformation, she ventured, choosing her words with care. If you're set on never letting anything become long-term, you might protect yourself from disappointment. But you could also miss out on genuine rewards, both in business and life. She paused, anxiety flaring that she might have overstepped. Yet his expression only tightened, a shadow crossing his gaze, as though her remark had hit a nerve he typically buried. He cleared his throat, adopting a brisker tone. "Your proposals are good," he said, promptly pivoting back to the philanthropic blueprint. "We'll refine them and present to the board in 2 weeks. Let's keep everything succinct. No illusions about indefinite commitments. Our brand will show benevolence, but maintain its trademark efficiency." Sensing her protest, he held up a hand. "Please, Miss Vale, I appreciate your dedication, but trust me. Full-blown emotional ties, whether personal or philanthropic, can sabotage everything if not carefully controlled." She forced on a thin smile, unsure whether to challenge him further. "Understood," she managed, flipping through her notes with mechanical precision. "We'll finalize an action plan that's practical enough to convince the board," Amara said, wrapping up the conversation. The meeting ended, and she excused herself politely. Hours later, back at her desk, she replayed the exchange in her head. His caution about indefinite commitments nagged at her, echoing the rumor that he fathered children across different continents, ensuring no single relationship or child could lock him down. A shiver of both discomfort and fascination shot through her. She reminded herself that people had the right to their lifestyle choices, no matter how extreme. Yet part of her found it impossible not to judge a man who flitted from relationship to relationship, leaving intangible fatherhood behind. Does he realize the cost of such detachment, she wondered. Inadvertently, she recalled a snippet from an article about Thornwood's philanthropic push in an African country, abruptly halted after 6 months. Could that, too, have been a reflection of his inability to commit long-term? By dusk, she caught sight of Elias Thornwood leaving for the day, striding across the lobby amid a hush. Colleagues parted like waves, offering subdued greetings that he acknowledged with a stiff nod. At one point, he locked eyes with her across the marble expanse, just for a second, something unreadable passing between them. Then he was gone, vanishing into a tinted car that whisked him away, presumably to another fleeting arrangement, or a hush-hush paternal responsibility. She tried to quell the sense of empathy that warred with disapproval in her chest. That night, she retreated to her small apartment, tossing and turning as the city's neon glow slipped through her curtains. She wanted to concentrate on the philanthropic rollout, to anchor her thoughts on actionable goals. But Elias Thornwood's paradoxical aura loomed in her mind. A man who believed in forging momentary connections, yet also sought the applause of philanthropic success, all while brandishing a vow not to remain emotionally bound. She couldn't deny a spark of pity for him. The vow that protected him from heartbreak seemed also to imprison him in a lonely fortress. As she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, she conceded a simmering hope. Perhaps, amidst the swirl of corporate pragmatism and personal rumor, he might discover a reason to let real commitment take root. Early the next morning, Amara arrived at Thornwood Tower, bracing for another challenging day. The glow of dawn tinted the glass facade in pale pink, almost tender in contrast to the building's imposing lines. She couldn't shake the strange unease lodged in her thoughts. Rumors about Elias Thornwood fathering multiple children through NDAs, his openly declared vow to avoid emotional ties, and his new philanthropic ambitions that now required her expertise. Somehow, all those elements felt entwined, forming a puzzle she was drawn to solve, even as she told herself to remain strictly professional. She settled into her corner workspace, powering on her laptop and scanning overnight emails. A meeting invite from Elias flashed on her screen. 9:30 a.m. private office, review philanthropic next steps. No additional context. Immediately, her heart gave a little leap. He rarely scheduled one-on-one sessions so quickly. People in the open plan area noticed the shift in her expression, but she tried to project calm. After all, these were the routine demands of her new role, nothing more. By 9:25, she made her way upstairs, stopping briefly to sip water and steady her nerves. A handful of employees hovered near Elias' assistant's desk, and their hushed conversation ceased when she appeared. The faint stares prickled across her back, and her mouth felt uncomfortably dry. Despite her best efforts, she couldn't completely dismiss the gossip swirling about how Mr. Thornwood's personal fatherhood approach might intersect with her philanthropic work. The rumor mill was merciless, and even though nothing had actually happened beyond professional discussions, their 2 short weeks of collaboration had apparently ignited fresh speculation. When she stepped into Elias's office, she found him standing at the tinted window, staring out over the Manhattan skyline. His suit jacket hung on a nearby chair, leaving him in a crisp white shirt that accentuated the tension in his shoulders. Morning sunlight bathed his form in a subdued glow, highlighting the angles of his face, a face that appeared more pensive than usual. He turned when she entered, his gaze briefly scanning her from head to toe before offering a faint smile. "Miss Vale," he greeted, motioning for her to close the door. She complied, letting the latch click, aware they were now sealed off from the rest of the office. "You want to see me?" she inquired, keeping her voice neutral. Her mind raced, bracing for a conversation about budgets or brand alignment. Perhaps he had discovered some nuance in her proposals that he disliked. Or maybe, she thought with a stir of unease, he wanted to discuss the hush money ledger she'd stumbled upon. But his first words defied her expectations. "I've been reading through your suggestions for deeper community engagement," he said, stepping away from the window. "Specifically, the plan to partner with local maternal health clinics in underserved neighborhoods." He paused, a flash of conflict stirring in his eyes. "Your approach is thorough, emphasizing both immediate benefits and long-term support for mothers and children. Usually I dismiss such commitments as potential PR landmines. But this time," his voice trailed off. She tilted her head, heart pounding. "This time?" she gently prompted. A faint tension lined his forehead as he forced a wry smile. "Let's just say, certain personal considerations make me reluctant to reject anything supporting mothers and children out of hand." He lifted a hand, cutting off her inevitable question. "Don't misunderstand. I'm not suddenly caving to sentiment. However, your plan addresses a public concern. Thornwood Enterprises cannot simply dabble in charitable acts and then vanish. We must show sincerity, or the media frenzy about my personal affairs will only worsen." Her chest tightened. So he was acknowledging indirectly that the rumor mill had teeth. It also hinted that he saw his paternal secrets as a liability, one that philanthropic sincerity could soften. She chose her next words carefully. "If the maternal clinics can be integrated into Thornwood's larger brand narrative of responsible investment, I believe we can gain both public trust and real community benefits. But it requires genuine follow-through, not just a press release." She kept her tone calm but firm. Any sign of timidity would be overshadowed by the force of his authority. Nodding, he retreated behind his imposing desk, motioning for her to sit in one of the modern, low-slung chairs facing him. The room felt strangely intimate, the hush thickening with every second. "I'm aware of that," he said, his eyes flicking over her face with a disconcerting thoroughness. "Which is why I summoned you. I've decided we'll allocate a significant portion of next quarter's philanthropic budget to this maternal health effort. Under your supervision, you'll handle negotiations, program outlines, everything. But we have to ensure it runs flawlessly. No loose ends that the tabloids can spin into hypocrisy." Amara studied him, her heart pounding. His vow to remain unentangled in real emotional commitments rang in her ears, yet here he was, leaning into a project that struck at the heart of his rumored paternal arrangements. A swirl of empathy tugged at her, despite her better judgment. Perhaps he saw supporting mothers and children publicly as both a shield and a chance to do something real, maybe even an indirect way of reconciling with his scattered fatherhood behind NDAs. It wasn't her place to psychoanalyze him, but it was hard not to wonder if a deeper conflict brooded behind his stoic mask. She agreed to his request, walking him through her preliminary contacts, an established maternal clinic chain, a community-based childcare center, and an advocacy group specializing in postpartum support. He listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions about timelines and brand synergy. The talk of synergy reminded her that no matter how philanthropic his intentions, he still framed everything through strategic optics. Yet a flicker of genuine warmth lit his eyes each time children's well-being took center stage. Eventually, their conversation veered onto more personal terrain. "What is it about children's issues that spurred your interest?" he asked, his tone casual yet loaded with subtext. She paused, pondering how much to reveal. Growing up, I saw a close friend struggle with postpartum depression, she admitted. She had no support from the father, and it nearly destroyed her. Ever since, I've believed that ignoring maternal health leaves entire communities vulnerable. The ripple effect is huge. He leaned back, absorbing her words. I see, he said softly. A hush followed. She perceived a flicker of guilt, or perhaps longing, ghosting across his features. The vow loomed in her mind. Did these fatherless children of his ever face that same ripple effect? She resisted the urge to pry, instead waiting, hoping he might volunteer insight. But the moment passed. Elias Thornwood pressed his lips into a thin line, as though locking away a confession. He cleared his throat and gestured at the digital slide she had cued on her tablet. Let's finalize the scope. We'll organize a formal press conference once we confirm the partnership. I'll need you to keep an ear out for any negative framing that might tie back to, well, speculation about my personal life. Amara nodded, stifling the myriad questions swirling in her head. She recognized an undercurrent of fear in him. The same fear that fueled his vow. The terror of being pinned down, of seeing his vulnerabilities paraded publicly. When their business talk drew to a close, neither spoke for a heartbeat. She prepared to stand, but he held her gaze, his voice momentarily shaking. Thank you for not pressing me about the rumors. I know they swirl around me constantly. You're the first who just does the job without moralizing. I appreciate that. Her throat tightened with conflicting emotions. I'm here to build a philanthropic wing that truly helps people, she said softly. Not to pry, but if you ever want to talk about... She stopped, swallowing. If you need advice or just a sounding board, I'm willing to listen. He let out a short, humorless laugh, fiddling with a pen on his desk. Careful what you offer, Miss Vale. My vow might overshadow every rational conversation we have. It was a cryptic statement, half challenge, half admission, that his defenses remained intact. She gave him a faint, kind smile in reply, uncertain how to decode his intent. Departing his office, she felt the tension linger, as though they had approached a threshold but refused to cross it. The vow was still an unyielding presence, overshadowing his every interaction. Yet the philanthropic plan progressed. The rest of her day was spent in back-to-back calls with prospective partners, each intrigued by Thornwood Enterprises' pivot into maternal health. She hammered out schedules, budgets, and rollout sequences. In the back of her mind, an unbidden empathy for Elias Thornwood simmered, despite his oddly dubious approach to fatherhood, or maybe because of it. She perceived a battered vulnerability behind his outward composure. Late that evening, she filed the final proposals and left Thornwood Tower, stepping into the swirl of city traffic. Her reflection in the building's mirror-like panels revealed her own fatigue. She had intended for this job to be a simple rung on the career ladder, a chance to shape big, philanthropic endeavors at a high-powered firm. Yet in just a few weeks, she'd confronted the swirling rumors of the CEO's vow to father multiple children with different women and discovered a quiet, haunting ache behind his eyes. She wondered if he could ever let that vow go, or if the cracks she thought she glimpsed were illusions. At her modest apartment, exhaustion pulled her onto the couch. She stared at the city lights beyond her window, recalling his final words. My vow might overshadow every rational conversation we have. The vow loomed like a fortress wall, built to protect him from heartbreak, yet also cutting him off from real emotional connection. She felt torn between professional loyalty and a deeper compassion for him as a person. The line between the two felt precariously blurred. She had no illusions that she could single-handedly dismantle his vow, nor did she intend to try. But as she drifted into uneasy sleep, she admitted she cared more than she had anticipated. Elias Thornwood was not merely a cold-hearted magnate. He was a puzzle of fears and secrets, and every day she spent shaping Thornwood Enterprises' philanthropic future, she inched one step closer to the private core of the man who insisted he could never be bound by love. Amara's plan to steer Thornwood Enterprises' philanthropic efforts toward maternal health clinics was making quiet, steady progress, until a new complication struck. On a rainy Wednesday afternoon, a series of hushed conversations erupted among the staff. Elias Thornwood had abruptly canceled 3 major investor calls and was spotted leaving the building in the company of a distraught-looking woman. The rumor mill instantly turned to life, with half the office whispering that this stranger was one of his arrangements, perhaps coming to confront him over hush money or a sudden shift in their contract. Amara, in the middle of finalizing grant allocations, felt her stomach clench. She tried to remain outwardly calm, but a creeping anxiety told her something big was unfolding just beyond her reach. An hour later, her phone buzzed with an unexpected text. "Need your help. 9th floor, private lounge." It was from Elias, short and uncharacteristically abrupt. She hurried to the elevator, ignoring the sideways glances from coworkers who likely wondered why the philanthropic manager was being summoned to a private area. The 9th floor of Thornwood Tower housed a set of lavish lounges, typically reserved for high-profile guests or delicate negotiations. Even the corridor leading there felt hushed, with carpet muffling footsteps and walls adorned with art that whispered of exclusivity. Outside one of the lounges, she paused to gather her nerves, then entered. The room was furnished in muted tones, deep armchairs, soft lighting, and a long window that framed the drizzle-soaked city skyline. Elias stood near the window, his jacket discarded on a nearby chair, his posture rigid with tension. Seated on a couch was a woman with tear-stained cheeks, clutching a tissue in her trembling hands. She glanced up at Amara's entrance, her eyes desperate and suspicious at once. Amara recognized her vaguely. Perhaps she'd glimpsed a photograph in some digital rumor snippet or PR folder. Elias offered a terse nod as Amara approached. "Her name's Serena Marlowe," he said quietly, gesturing for Amara to sit. "She's come here with unexpected news." A pause hung in the air. "She believes her son, my son, needs urgent medical treatment, which our hush money arrangement never accounted for," he said, the words forced but laced with composure. Yet Amara saw conflict and concern flickering behind his gaze. The vow that once dictated minimal paternal involvement now clashed brutally with the reality of a child's health crisis. Serena Marlowe cast a wary glance at Amara. "He told me about you," she managed in a quivering voice. "Said you're overseeing some new philanthropic thing. I don't care about PR. I need real help." She swallowed, rage and fear mingling in her tone. "He's your child, Elias, and the treatments are expensive. It goes beyond that monthly check you insisted upon." For a long moment, Amara's heart pounded as she observed Elias Thornwood's face. The stoic lines at the corners of his mouth seemed on the verge of collapse. Here was the private arrangement laid bare, a vow to father children without becoming emotionally entangled. Yet now a mother confronted him with a tangible problem that demanded more than money. It demanded compassion. It demanded a father's love, or at least involvement, beyond contractual stipulations. Amara broke the thick silence first, clearing her throat gently. "We can figure something out," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "Thornwood Enterprises has resources, and if your son's medical condition is urgent, we can expedite philanthropic channels or personal coverage." She paused, turning to Elias. "But you must decide how transparent you want to be. This isn't a typical hush money scenario. This is a child's life at stake. Elias's hands balled into fists at his sides. The vow that once provided an easy justification, don't get attached, don't entangle, buckled under the gravity of a real child suffering. He inhaled, his gaze flicking to Serena Marlowe, then to Amara. I never wanted emotional involvement, he said, his voice trembling. But I can't ignore this. He let out a short, raw laugh. Maybe ignoring was exactly what I was doing. His eyes flicked to the window, then back, resolve forming in his expression. Oh, we'll get your son the best care possible, he told Serena Marlowe. No NDAs this time. No half measures. Serena Marlowe's eyes widened at his sudden shift from cold to earnest. For a moment, relief and confusion mingled in her tear-streaked face. Then she nodded, too drained to contest it. Amara offered a faint, encouraging smile, sensing that, while the immediate crisis might be addressed, the deeper ramifications were just beginning. In the hush that followed, she scribbled contact information for specialized pediatric facilities and jotted a list of next steps. Elias ran a hand through his hair, tension radiating in the set of his shoulders. Eventually, as they wrapped up the impromptu meeting, Serena Marlowe left with the necessary details, murmuring a subdued gratitude that felt more like raw exhaustion. Elias thanked her stiltedly, his words loaded with an apology he couldn't quite express. Once the door clicked shut behind her, the hush returned, thick with revelation. Amara didn't know how to fill the silence, so she simply placed a supportive hand on Elias's forearm, a gesture far more intimate than anything they typically shared. He stared at her hand, then at her face. The vow that once shielded him from such closeness seemed suddenly inadequate. This complicates everything, he said quietly, his voice tinged with self-derision. For years, I believed, as long as no one expected emotional investment, the arrangement stayed clean. But he trailed off, running out of rational excuses. I just realized how naive that was. Amara softened, letting her hand linger. People, especially children, aren't just line items in a ledger, she said gently. They grow. They have needs beyond financial checks. And if your vow was meant to keep you free, maybe all it did was fence you into a corner. She attempted a small, rueful smile. Though I can't claim to understand your world fully. A trembling exhale escaped him, and for an instant, vulnerability glistened in his eyes. I always told myself I was protecting them from me, he admitted, his voice raw. From fatherly expectation I couldn't fulfill, from the heartbreak I saw in my own upbringing. I thought no single relationship or child could tie me down if I spread them out. But now, seeing Serena Marlowe desperate, I realize I might have inflicted a worse sort of heartbreak, one that thrives in neglect. Her heart twisted at the raw confession. She recognized the crossroads he stood upon. Either he'd cling to the vow out of fear, or he'd break it entirely, acknowledging that real connections and real obligations existed. Impulsively, she squeezed his arm in unspoken solidarity. It's not too late, she said softly, to fix this, at least for that child. He nodded, swallowing hard. I'll handle it, he whispered, his eyes dropping to the polished floor. And I might need your help, not just financially. The press can smell a story. My philanthropic pivot is about to converge with a personal crisis I hope to avoid. A faint, bitter laugh escaped him. Maybe it's time I let that vow go. She studied him, her brow furrowing with empathy. If that's what you choose, I'll support you. But it won't be an easy path, either personally or professionally. She paused, understanding the monumental nature of what he might do. You're effectively rewriting the foundation of your entire approach to life. And the board, the media, They might jump at the chance to exploit your vulnerabilities. He exhaled, his eyes flicking to the door where Serena Marlowe had left. Yes, he said, but a vow that sacrifices emotional responsibility for control was never truly a promise. It was an excuse, and it's unraveling anyway. His eyes lifted to hers, uncertain yet resolute. I trust you, Miss Vale, he murmured, to help me navigate the philanthropic aspects. But I also need someone I can speak with. Someone who won't judge me as a monster for my past, if you can do that. She offered a trembling nod, simultaneously proud and apprehensive. I'll do my best, she whispered, though I can't pretend to have all the answers. Their gazes held for a heartbeat, a silent acknowledgement that they were treading dangerous ground, beyond mere corporate alliances. Then footsteps in the corridor signaled the approach of other staff. Instantly, the hush between them dissipated into forced normalcy. She drew her hand from his arm, stepping back. He cleared his throat, his posture reverting to a rigid composure for the sake of the office's prying eyes. They resumed their roles, CEO and consultant, just discussing philanthropic strategies. When she left the lounge, her heart thundering in her chest, she understood that everything had changed. Elias Thornwood's vow might not survive the reality of a child needing his genuine care. More significantly, it might not survive the presence of a woman in his life, someone who saw beyond the rumor of fathering kids far and wide to the lonely man who had once believed love was a prison. She felt excitement and caution entwine within her, each step echoing with the knowledge that when a vow breaks, the aftermath can be both harrowing and unexpectedly beautiful. Amar's next few days at Thornwood Enterprises blurred into a haze of meetings, frantic phone calls, and uneasy glances directed her way by the staff. Whispers abounded that Elias Thornwood had left the office in a flurry to attend to a personal emergency involving one of his arrangements, and that he had consulted her, of all people, to help manage the fallout. The philanthropic group she led was new and not widely understood, but rumors pinned her as the CEO's new confidant, sparking curious or envious speculation. Though she tried to focus on finalizing the maternal health partnership deals, she couldn't help but notice the hush that fell in her wake when she walked through corridors or stepped into the cafeteria. It felt like an entire building waiting for a scandal to erupt behind closed doors. She worked tirelessly to restructure the philanthropic budget, making room for a specialized fund that could discreetly handle situations like Serena Marlowe's son. It wasn't purely hush money, more of an emergency medical allowance that, if necessary, Thornwood Enterprises could present publicly as part of its new philanthropic push. Yet in her gut, she recognized the gray area. Was she assisting in covering up Elias Thornwood's paternal responsibilities? Or was she genuinely helping a child in need? Each revision to the budget brought that question to mind, stirring guilt and a pang of protectiveness for the boy whose father had effectively tried to keep him at arm's length. Late one evening, she got a text from Elias's assistant. Mr. Thornwood requests a meeting. Your office. In 10. She wasn't used to him visiting her small, open-plan workspace on the 24th floor. Typically, she reported to his lofty executive suite. Something about the sudden shift made her nerves jangle. Quickly, she tidied her desk of sensitive printouts regarding the hush money ledger, though she suspected he might want to discuss that very issue. 15 minutes later, he stepped off the elevator, drawing stares from employees unaccustomed to seeing the boss in these lesser floors. Dressed in a sleek dark suit, he radiated tension, but forced a polite nod at those who murmured greetings. She stood to greet him, her eyes flicking around at colleagues who tried and failed to look busy. With a tight smile, she gestured him toward a small conference room adjoining her workspace. He followed in silence, shutting the door behind them. The instant it clicked shut, a hush enveloped them, and his composure wavered. "I'm sorry to barge in," he began, his voice subdued. "I needed somewhere less official to talk." She sensed a hidden weight in his tone, akin to the tip of an iceberg revealing deeper turmoil below. "My office feels too exposed right now," he added. "Security cameras, staff who watch every move. Here it's a bit safer, ironically." She offered him a seat at the modest table while she took one across from him. Over the last few days, she'd grown adept at stifling her startled reactions to his uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I understand," she said softly. "What's on your mind?" Part of her braced for an awkward confession about fatherhood, or another urgent crisis from one of his arrangements. He inhaled slowly, his fingers tapping the table's edge. "I visited Serena Marlowe's son," he admitted, a faint tremor undermining his usual cool diction. "He's in the hospital, awaiting a specialized surgery for a congenital heart defect. Nothing I've faced in business prepared me for that. Seeing him so small, so fragile, and seeing how he looked at me like a stranger." A flicker of raw pain shadowed his eyes. "I can cover the bills, but is that enough? And the vow I once swore that I'd never be tied to one woman or one family suddenly feels monstrous." A wave of pity surged in Amara. She recalled how the building's rumor mill painted him as a soulless figure, collecting children like assets. The reality, she realized, was more tragic. In trying to dodge intimacy, he'd sacrificed the possibility of paternal love. "Being a father is more than providing checks," she said gently, leaning forward. "And a vow designed to protect you from heartbreak won't stand up to a child's need for genuine care. If you really want to help, maybe it's time to let go of that vow entirely." His face twisted in a momentary grimace, as though the idea physically hurt. "But how do I walk away from an entire worldview?" "I built my empire on certain principles," he said, his voice low and heavy. "Keep personal ties shallow. Prevent emotional sabotage. Now everything is inverted. It's not sabotage, I fear. It's regret. Regret that I never learned how to be there for these children." She swallowed, fighting to maintain a composed empathy. "Start small," she murmured. "One child, one relationship at a time. Let your philanthropic pivot reflect that sincerity. Open your heart to the real possibility of fatherhood, not just hush money. You're already supporting maternal health. Imagine what it means if you personally champion that cause, letting people see you care." A hush followed as he processed her words, tension lining his brow. Before he could reply, a knock sounded. One of the philanthropic team members, carrying a binder of updates, froze upon seeing Elias Thornwood, quickly apologized, and withdrew. He exhaled in frustration. "We should finish discussing these matters privately," he said. "For now, let's address the immediate steps. The fund for Serena Marlowe's son. How to incorporate it without fueling gossip, I trust your expertise." His tone regained a measure of corporate formality, reminding her that for all his newfound emotional struggles, he remained the calculating CEO. They spent the next hour refining the philanthropic budget, weaving a line item that could discreetly cover the child's medical bills. She insisted on a measure of transparency, enough so it wouldn't come across as pure obfuscation. He reluctantly agreed, making her promise to craft a plausible explanation for the board in case they noticed a shift in allocations. Their synergy was practical yet tinged with undercurrents of tension, an unspoken awareness that this crisis was about more than money. It was about him inching closer to confronting the consequences of a vow that, once governed, his entire adult life. By the time they parted ways, the corridor had grown busy with employees returning from lunch. As he exited, staffers gaped at the sight of their CEO emerging from a modest conference room on the philanthropic floor. Amara exited a minute later, meeting the disbelieving glances with as much calm as she could muster, aware that each step might breed fresh rumors. She considered how to handle them, but the job demanded her attention. She had another meeting to finalize the maternal health partnership that afternoon. The partnership talks advanced promisingly. Overshadowed by her internal swirl, she ached to share with Elias her conviction that philanthropic success could anchor him in something beyond fleeting flings and hush money. Yet she recognized he wasn't ready for lectures on emotional rebirth. His vow might be trembling, but it was still an integral part of his identity. So she continued her methodical approach, forging alliances with clinics and establishing a foundation blueprint that could evolve Thornwood Enterprises' brand from a remote corporate giant to a genuine community player. She suspected, or hoped, that in nurturing these public commitments he might find the courage to nurture his hidden children, too. Night draped the city by the time she closed her laptop and prepared to leave. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Thank you for earlier. Simple, subdued, yet carrying more weight than a standard business courtesy." She typed back, "We'll make this work, for the child's sake. Keep me updated on any developments." She paused, nearly writing something more personal, but reined herself in, pressing send. She felt a pang of both resolve and uncertainty. Back at her apartment, she stared at the city lights through her window, her mind replaying the day's events. The vow that once seemed unshakable was now teetering on the edge of collapse. And with it, so was the carefully constructed world of Elias Thornwood. She stared at the city lights through her window, her mind replaying the day's events. Elias Thornwood, once the embodiment of emotional detachment, was at the cusp of stepping over the line he had drawn for himself. She wondered if, in helping him transform Thornwood Enterprises' philanthropic image, she was also guiding him toward a deeper transformation. From a man who fathered multiple children at emotional arm's length, to someone willing to embrace the bonds that made life truly meaningful. And if that happened, would she too be drawn into the vortex of his personal redemption, breaking her own boundary between professional distance and genuine affection? The vow he once stated so casually, "I'll be with you tonight, but don't be jealous if I have kids with other women," was losing its grip. And with it, her own illusions of neutrality might be slipping away. Drifting into an uneasy sleep, she remained convinced that, come morning, new battles would arise. The board or the media discovering the hush money expansion, perhaps another mother stepping forward, or, more quietly but more dangerously, her own heart succumbing to a longing for the man behind the vow. Yet, in the quiet hush, she felt a spark of hope. That love might surmount even the strongest vow of isolation, forging a future in which fatherhood and emotional depth could coexist and perhaps even flourish, despite every warning sign telling them otherwise. The following week dawned under a tense hush that seemed to cling to every corridor of Thornwood Tower. Word had spread quietly like a mounting storm that the CEO was funneling additional funds into an unnamed child's medical expenses. Staff whispered theories about hush money, NDAs, and Elias Thornwood's personal vow, each rumor feeding a swirl of speculation. Amara Vale, juggling her philanthropic responsibilities and her new role as unwitting confidant, found herself fielding veiled questions about the sudden shift in budget lines. She deflected inquiries as best she could, citing current philanthropic reallocation without betraying any personal details. But the watchful eyes of co-workers and potential leaks to the press made every day feel like navigating a minefield. By midweek, the philanthropic campaign was on track for an official launch, an event that would see Elias Thornwood speaking publicly about Thornwood Enterprises' deepening commitment to maternal and child health. It was a carefully orchestrated affair, designed to project sincerity rather than mere PR. Yet Amara found the entire spectacle weighed heavily on her. On one hand, she believed wholeheartedly in the cause. On the other, she worried it might become a stage for rumors to escalate into full-blown scandal. Still, she pressed on, meticulously fine-tuning the event's details with colleagues, while Elias, juggled urgent calls from board members who demanded reassurance that the philanthropic pivot wouldn't sabotage the firm's bottom line. An unexpected summons. Late one afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from Elias's assistant. "Mr. Thornwood requests your presence in the sub-level garage. In 10 minutes. Urgent. No questions." The unusual summons rattled her. Typically, Elias handled business in his penthouse suite, or occasionally her modest meeting rooms. Why the subterranean parking facility? She shoved her notes into a leather folder and hurried down the staff elevator. When she arrived, the subterranean space felt dim and echoing, overhead fluorescents flickering off the polished hoods of expensive cars. Standing by a glossy black SUV, Elias waited, tension etched across his features. He motioned her inside the car with a terse gesture, and she complied, slipping into the passenger seat. The driver, a burly man in a neat suit, nodded in greeting. Elias shut the door, settling next to her. "We're going to the hospital," he said without preamble, his voice a quiet steel. Confusion and dread roiled inside her. "What happened?" she asked, half afraid of the answer. "Serena Marlowe's child took a turn for the worse," Elias explained tightly. "She called me, begging for additional help. I wanted you to come. You know the philanthropic channels, and..." He swallowed, his gaze flashing with a vulnerability that jarred her. "I'm not sure I can handle this alone." The SUV glided into the city's chaotic streets, the hum of traffic and the wail of distant sirens forming a tense backdrop. The driver navigated deftly, weaving among cabs and hurried pedestrians. Inside, Elias spoke in low, disjointed confessions. The vow, once a shield, now felt like a muzzle, preventing him from offering real paternal care. Guilt gnawed at him each time he recalled the boy's fearful eyes. Amara listened, her heart pounding. She sensed that, with every mile, he was stepping further from his vow's protective shell. They arrived at a children's hospital perched on a busy avenue. Elias's driver ushered them in through a side entrance, presumably to avoid paparazzi or staff who might tip off the press. The corridors smelled of antiseptic, their bright lights reflecting off polished floors. Gurneys and medical personnel bustled about, overshadowed by the hush of worried parents at every turn. Elias strode beside Amara, his posture stiff, his eyes scanning each sign for the pediatric ward. She saw anxiety ghost across his face, rare cracks in the composure he wielded so easily in corporate halls. They found Serena Marlowe in a small waiting area, pacing with frantic energy. She barely acknowledged Amara, focusing on Elias with tearful reproach. They say he might need surgery sooner than planned," she muttered, her voice trembling. "Your money helped secure an excellent surgeon, but we can't wait for next month. It has to happen now, or..." She broke off, her eyes brimming with terror. Elias placed a hesitant hand on her arm, responding with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Then we'll expedite it. Whatever is required, no matter the cost. I can..." He paused, his voice shaking slightly. "I can also be here if that's what you want, Serena Marlowe." She blinked in obvious surprise. For a moment, a flicker of gratitude warred with bitterness. Then she nodded, as though lacking the strength to argue. Amara stepped in, offering to handle the administrative chaos. She called in philanthropic favors from medical contacts if necessary, finding a nurse's station and explaining in measured detail that Thornwood Enterprises would underwrite any emergency fees, that no approval from insurance or elaborate paperwork should delay the boy's care. The nurses glanced at Elias, recognized him from tabloids, and offered quick acknowledgments. Meanwhile, he spoke with the lead pediatrician, relinquishing the stoic facade as he asked incisive questions about risk factors and outcomes. In that busy warren of medical wards and hushed corridors, Elias's vow about fatherhood and emotional distance eroded further. He pressed a palm to the glass of an observation window, watching from a vantage point as doctors wheeled the boy into a pre-op ward. Amara hovered near him, wishing she could say something that would mitigate his guilt. He turned to her, his gaze weighted with vulnerability. "For so long, I thought providing financial security was enough," he whispered, his voice harsh. But seeing him in that bed, he couldn't finish the sentence, swallowing a surge of emotion. Gently, she touched his arm. "Money helps, but children need more than that," she said, echoing her prior arguments. "You see it now. Love, presence, accountability. They're not just weaknesses." He exhaled shakily, nodding. "Yes," he murmured. "I only wish I'd learned this sooner." The tense wait. Several tense hours stretched on, with Elias pacing the waiting room, flinching whenever a nurse stepped out with an update. Amara acted as a buffer, retrieving coffee or speaking with the hospital administrators to press for urgency. The hush of the ward, interrupted by beeping machines and urgent announcements, contrasted starkly with Thornwood Enterprises' polished corridors. Here, raw human fragility overshadowed corporate power. Elias, whose vow once boasted of fathering multiple children while claiming no emotional entanglement, found that vow dissolving in the presence of real paternal fear. When at last the surgeon emerged with a guarded smile, explaining the surgery's success, both Elias Thornwood and Serena Marlowe exhaled relief in a wave of tears. The moment was messy, heartfelt. Serena Marlowe clung to Elias's sleeve, and for a heartbeat he let her, though guilt flashed in his eyes. Amara, standing to the side, felt an ache of compassion for them both. She recognized that, for Elias, this was a defining pivot. The vow had truly faltered in the face of a child's mortal fragility. Eventually, Elias broke away to join Amara near a corner, his voice taut with the leftover adrenaline. "Thank you," he said, running a hand over his face, "for helping, for just being here." She touched his hand lightly, ignoring her own rush of awkward feeling in front of Serena Marlowe. "It's what the philanthropic side of Thornwood Enterprises can do," she replied. "But it's also something any decent human would do if they saw a child in need." Then gentler, she added, "There's no shame in caring more deeply than your vow once allowed." He closed his eyes for a long moment, then exhaled. "I suspect this won't be the last time I have to face the consequences of my vow. Maybe that's okay. Maybe I'm ready to let go of that vow entirely, step by step." She nodded, offering a faint, reassuring smile. The drive back. The drive back to Thornwood Tower was subdued. Elias insisted on dropping Amara at her apartment, to spare her from returning to the office so late. They sat in mutual silence, the SUV's interior lights casting faint reflections in the tinted windows as they neared her building. The hush broke as he turned to her, the city's neon glow shadowing the angles of his face. "I used to think fatherhood was just a word," he admitted softly, "an incidental detail. Tonight I realized it's a bond that demands everything, or it's worthless." She swallowed the lump in her throat, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "You're on the right path, I believe," she said at last. "And you don't have to walk it alone." The words reverberated with a deeper connotation, an unspoken offer of emotional solidarity. He understood, giving her a barely perceptible nod. As the car pulled over, he leaned in, brushing a chaste kiss to her temple, so brief it might have been a figment of her tired mind. Yet the warmth of it lingered, weaving hope into her chest despite the swirling complexities. Stepping out onto the curb, she turned back to see him watching her with an expression torn between gratitude and some deeper, unspoken feeling. Then the door closed, and the SUV merged into the city's restless tide, leaving her heart thrumming. The vow was not just cracked, it was in tatters. Whether Thornwood Enterprises and the tabloids would soon devour the story, or if Elias might face betrayal from the board for shifting too far from his cold persona, neither she nor he could predict. But that night, Amara Vale drifted to sleep with the lingering sense that love, once a concept she believed too messy for corporate life, was forging a path where fatherhood, philanthropy, and raw vulnerability might just converge, no matter how improbable it seemed in the cutthroat kingdom Elias Thornwood had built around himself. The next day, late afternoon sunlight glowed through the tinted windows of the penthouse-level conference room, casting golden shapes across the polished floors. Amara sat at one end of the long table, reviewing the final details for Thornwood Enterprises' upcoming philanthropic launch. Her nerves bristled. The air felt charged with an underlying tension that had brooded since Elias Thornwood's sudden rush to help his ailing son, while the hush money expansions and paternal revelations hadn't yet broken into a full-blown scandal, had left gossip swirling and the board increasingly restless. They expected a triumphant philanthropic event that would cement Thornwood Enterprises' positive brand transformation. Yet they also sniffed out vulnerability in Elias's stoic demeanor. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Elias Thornwood strode in, wearing a crisp gray suit that couldn't conceal the tired lines beneath his eyes. He took a seat beside her, scanning a stack of documents with uncharacteristic pensiveness. "We're a day away from the launch," he said, his tone so subdued it was almost a whisper. "The final press invites went out this morning, so there's no turning back. This is our biggest PR move of the quarter, maybe of the entire year." Amara nodded, fiddling with her pen as an uneasy flicker of worry took root in her stomach. The philanthropic event would be held at a high-profile art center downtown. Major news outlets, influential bloggers, local politicians, and nonprofit leaders had all RSVP'd. The aim was to showcase Thornwood Enterprises' commitment to maternal and child health, unveiling partnerships with various clinics and community programs. On paper, it was a bold attempt to shift the narrative away from rumors about Elias's vow or hush money deals. But in practice, it felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of speculation. The slightest misstep, and the vow, once a half-boasted rumor, could become front-page fodder in the tabloids. As they wrapped up the final bullet points, Elias's assistant poked her head in, bearing urgent news. Liam Marlowe, a cunning investor aligned with certain board members, had called an unscheduled meeting for that very evening. The reason was opaque. "Pressing concerns about corporate stewardship," the assistant quoted, her face tight with anxiety. Elias's jaw clenched. Without a word, he snapped the file shut and exchanged a knowing look with Amara. The boardroom confrontation. In the next hour, a flurry of calls and texts led them to a small boardroom on the 18th floor, where Liam Marlowe and two other directors awaited. Crisp suits and steely expressions exuded professional menace. The vibe was somber, reminiscent of a preemptive inquisition. Amara, though officially only the philanthropic strategist, was summoned at Elias's request. "I need your clarity in case they attack the philanthropic side," he had murmured to her in passing. She had agreed, bracing herself for the worst. Sure enough, Liam Marlowe opened the discussion with a clipped remark about gaps in certain budget lines and growing media suspicion around Thornwood Enterprises' CEO. A hush hung in the room as his glare flickered between Elias and Amara, but primarily pinned Elias with calculated intensity. "We all support philanthropic expansions," Liam Marlowe said, mustering a thin smile, "but not if they're used to camouflage personal indiscretions that might backfire on our brand." A cold prickle ran along Amara's spine. She recognized how precarious this confrontation was. If Elias admitted to funneling extra money for his son's medical crisis, or if Liam Marlowe demanded details about the child's paternity, the vow's unraveling would be laid bare in the most humiliating form possible. Gathering her composure, she stepped in, her voice calm but firm. "Our philanthropic campaign is public, not camouflage. We've structured it for sustainable community impact. Any emergency funds are standard practice for unforeseen crises in targeted communities." Liam Marlowe pounced. "Is that so? Even if the crisis in question ties back directly to Mr. Thornwood's rumored private obligations?" He let the implication hang, his smug expression telegraphing that he'd gleaned at least a partial truth. A muscle twitched along Elias Thornwood's jaw, but he spoke calmly. "Rumors are just that. Rumors. Thornwood Enterprises' philanthropic moves are legitimate, and we have the metrics to prove it." The other directors remained silent, watching the exchange with measured interest. After a tense pause, Liam Marlowe changed tack, arching an eyebrow. "You once boasted you'd never be encumbered by conventional relationships, Elias. Some of us found that vow reassuring, proof you'd keep your focus on the firm's success, never letting personal affairs muddy corporate strategy." He shrugged theatrically. "But now we see your philanthropic pivot entangled with personal matters. Are you certain you're not letting emotional entanglements sabotage the very vow that guided your leadership?" Amara expected Elias to retort with ice-cold scorn, but to her shock, his expression only tightened with a flicker of regret. He exhaled, smoothing the cuffs of his shirt as though steadying himself. "If I once believed that vow served the company," he began, his voice evenly measured, "I now see it might have become a liability in itself. The board needs results, not a vow." His gaze locked on Liam Marlowe, unflinching. "You'll get results. Our philanthropic direction stands. I won't apologize for recalibrating my personal stance if it means forging a more authentic brand. If that disconcerts certain board members who preferred my old approach, so be it." A hush followed. The directors exchanged uncertain glances. Liam Marlowe, briefly nonplussed, recovered enough to let out a sardonic laugh. "Authentic brand? Or your own attempt to hush rumors of fathering multiple children across NDAs?" Amara's heart nearly seized at the direct statement. She saw Elias's face darken, but he maintained composure. Without giving Liam Marlowe's words the courtesy of a direct denial, he pivoted to a pointed summary of Thornwood Enterprises' improved public sentiment under the philanthropic push. Then, in a smooth concluding statement, he requested the board's trust for the upcoming launch. "Judge me by the firm's performance and the philanthropic accomplishments, not by rumors," he said, finalizing the matter with a ring of authority. Though the directors didn't appear fully convinced, they lacked immediate ammunition to overrule him. Liam Marlowe ended the meeting with a tight-lipped vow to keep a close eye, dismissing the assembly. As they left, Amara glimpsed relief flashing in Elias's eyes. She too felt her lungs release a pent-up breath. The Jacks' unraveling had danced dangerously close to public exposure, but they had escaped, at least for now, later that evening. Once the building had emptied, they reconvened in Amara's modest office to finalize the last details for the philanthropic event. The city's neon shimmer flickered through the window. She read off bullet points about the schedule media on and invited guests, her voice trembling with lingering adrenaline. Thornwood listened quietly occasionally, nodding occasionally, adding a dry remark about which news outlets might be friendliest, but after the final logistic was ticked off, a silence settled thick with personal tension. He spoke first. "Thank you for Thornwood me up in that Boer fiasco. I realize how precarious it must feel for you defending a vow you disagree with, or at least the remnants of it." His gaze, tinged with apology, swept her face. "I never intended to drag you into my private wars, but your clarity, it's been invaluable." She folded her hands on the desk to steal their trembling. "You once told me your vow protected you from heartbreak," she murmured. "But now it's turned into a sword hanging over your head. These are real children's lives. We're dealing with real consequences." She paused, summoning courage in the long run. No philanthropic campaign can mask the truth if you're truly faying multiple kids under NDAs. So maybe letting go of your vow entirely is the only honest path forward, even if it means stepping into a vulnerability you've always avoided. He lowered his gaze, tension pulling at the corners of his mouth. This vow was more than just avoiding attachments. It was my entire strategy for ensuring no single relationship or child could sabotage me like my parents sabotaged each other. His voice hushed, laced with a sorrow that rarely surfaced. But every day, the Jack feels more like a betrayal of those children, of the love I might have offered them, and of the possibility that I can't keep ignoring what I feel for someone else. His eyes flicked to her, their meaning potent. Her cheeks warmed. She met his gaze, a swell of empathy and unspoken affection. Welling up, "If love is sabotage, then maybe we need a better definition of sabotage," she said gently. "Because from where I stand, you're inching toward heartbreak by refusing to let yourself care enough." A shaky laugh escaped him. "I suspect you might be right, but I'm not certain how to proceed. Tomorrow's philanthropic event could either bolster my standing or blow it all open." Rumors spike. He straightened, drawing in a breath. "But I want to face it. I want Thornwood's fear to see that moral engagement isn't weakness, and perhaps I need to see it too for my own redemption." They parted. Then a silent bond settling between them that transcended professional lines. She watched him leave, realizing the Jack, and that once shaped his entire identity, stood on the brink of collapse. Whether tomorrow's event heralded a triumphant rebranding or a meltdown in front of cameras was anyone's guess. But in that precarious hush, they both felt an undercurrent of hope if he had the courage to own his paternal ties. If he dared to be vulnerable before the world, the Jack might crumble for good, leaving him free, not just to rectify the past, but to explore a new, deeper love. And for Amara, it signaled that her role in Thornwood Spar had shifted from philanthropic consultant to something far more personal, a beacon guiding Elias Thornwood out of the Jack's shadow into the uncertain light of genuine connection. The day of the philanthropic launch dawned with a nervous energy that thrummed throughout Thornwood Fear Tower. By mid-morning, the firm's upper floors buzzed with final preparations. Press passes were issued, camera crews and journalists milled about in designated areas, and staff members recited Tal Thornwood points in hushed clusters. Amara Vale checked her watch for what felt like the 800th time, heart-pounding despite weeks of orchestration. The entire event hinged on this single day, a day that would either prove Thornwood Sphere's commitment to maternal and child health, or expose every rumor swirling around its enigmatic CEO, Elias Thornwood, was uncharacteristically subdued all morning. He spent long minutes in his private suite pacing near the panoramic windows that offered a breath-to-Thornwood view of the city when Amara finally joined him there to go over the last details. She found him staring at a newscast on a muted screen, scrolling headlines, hinted at the reformed Thornwood's fear, but also teased there more to the Thornwood fatherhood rumor. The Jack he had once brandished his refusal to be tied to any single partner seemed on the brink of full public scrutiny. He glanced at her tension etched in the set of his jaw. No matter what, he said softly, "We won't back out. The philanthropic unveiling goes forward, and if anyone tries to corner me about my private choices—" He paused, gripping the back of a chair as though bracing for impact. "I'll face it." Amara heard the unspoken undertone. He would no longer let the Jack rule him through fear. She nodded. Forging a calm she didn't fully feel. "We have comprehensive data on how the maternal health partnership will operate, plus success stories from pilot clinics. You'll emphasize the sincerity of Thornwood Sphere's shift." And it pressed on personal issues. She swallowed, searching his eyes. "Answer carefully, but with honesty," he exhaled. "You have no idea how foreign that is, for me to be transparent about such vulnerabilities. But I'm ready," he murmured. Letting the Jack's final shreds slip away, a flicker of gratitude lit his gaze. "Thank you, truly. I'd never have confronted it without your guidance." Her cheeks warmed at his candidness. Before she could reply, his assistant rushed in, announcing that cars waited below the event were set to begin in an hour at a grand atrium downtown. Thornwood straightened his lapels, fixed a composed mask over his features, and escorted Amara out. Camera snapped the moment they emerged the lobby, capturing him, guiding her with a hand lightly placed at her back. Though the gesture could be purely polite, the hush from onlookers suggested they interpreted it differently regardless. There was no turning back. They arrived at the luminous atrium, where Thornwood Sphere's marketing team had outdone themselves. Banners displaying the maternal health initiative soared overhead. A tasteful stage with seating for VIP guests took center place, and media corners bristled with microphones. Guests from nonprofits, local government, and partner hospitals mingled, sipping refreshments. Scanning brochures that outlined the philanthropic plan, Amara scanned the crowd, searching for signals of negativity or protest, but found mostly intrigued faces. Promptly at noon, Thornwood took the stage. The entire hall quieted, cameras zeroing in. He delivered a prepared speech that began with measured corporate language, praising Thornwood Spar's success and acknowledging the potential for a deeper social role. But then he diverged from the script. "I've always run Thornwood Spear with an emphasis on strategic, short-term expansions," he admitted, voice clear yet edged with emotion. "What you see here marks a new direction," one acknowledging. "That real transformation requires genuine investment in people, in communities, and in the long game of man." Thornwood a difference. Amara stood at the side. Heart pounding, she recognized how precarious each word was. Sure enough, a reporter called out, "Mr. Thornwood, rumors persist that your philanthropic pivot is personal. Something to do with your vow never to commit any truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Jack was on everyone's mind, especially with swirling tales that he fathered. Children via NDAs, tension soared, and for a fraction of a second he appeared uncertain, haunted. Then his jaw set, a flicker of resolve crossing his face. "If you mean the rumors about how I..." He paused, exhaling softly. "Used to claim I'd never settle down, never love, never commit to one family. Well, let's just say the Jack that gave rise to those rumors has run its course. I discovered that you can't box up human relationships as mere transactions. Not without consequences, a hush fell across the audience. Journalists practically leaning forward, some staff members, and even a couple of board members stared in open surprise. He continued with unexpected earnestness. I won't detail every personal mistake, but let's be frank. Thornwood Sphere's philanthropic campaign is not a smoky screen. It's a new path for both me and this company, if that upsets those who prefer me as a remote figure counting profits. So be it. A trickle of applause broke out, uncertain but supportive. Meanwhile, certain press outlets perked up, scribbling or typing rapidly, as if they'd sniffed a scoop. Beyond corporate philanthropy, a confession. From the once untouchable Elias Thornwood, elated relief surged in Amara. The jack was shattered in a single public moment. No half measures or deflections. She half expected an immediate uproar, but the applause slowly grew after he concluded. Stepping away from the microphone, a small swarm of cameras clamored for quotes. He answered a few politely, then turned to greet philanthropic partners. As the orchestrated unveiling progressed, live demonstrations of clinic expansions, heartfelt endorsements from healthcare professionals. The sense of accomplishment thickened. For once, Thornwood Spar's name resonated with genuine goodwill, overshadowing the usual cynicism. Mara lost sight of Thornwood in the flurry of post-speech interviews. She busied herself guiding stakeholders, ensuring the display tables showcased the maternal health initiative accurately, yet in the swirl of press and well-wishers' rumors still flitted about. Did Elias Thornwood truly father children across multiple continents? Would he now step up as a real parent? She braced for a tabloid meltdown, but thus far the crowd's tone leaned curious rather than ravenous. The Jack's meltdown had evidently steered the narrative in an unexpected direction, one of redemption rather than condemnation. Only after the event started winding down, with guests trickling out and staff beginning to dismantle the stage, did Amara spot him again, standing near a fountain at the atrium's edge, gazing pensively into rippling water. She approached the hush of their proximity folding around them. "That was brave," she said softly, voice tinged with awe. "You risked everything, acknowledging the Jack and your readiness to change." He turned, eyes reflecting subdued but profound relief. "I felt I owed it," he murmured, "to the people I might have heard, to the children I neglected, and to you who believed Thornwood's fear could do better than token gestures." For a moment, raw emotion flitted over his face, an echo of the day he confronted his child's medical crisis. "I never guessed letting go of that vow would feel like exhaling after years of holding my breath." Before she could respond, a slender figure approached Serena Marlowe. "Look." Thornwood, hesitant and out of place among the retreating crowd, she offered a tiny wave to Amara, then fixed her attention on Thornwood. "I just wanted to say," she began, voice trembling. "Thank you for the extra support," the boy's responding well. "And the clinic staff said you visited his room when I wasn't there." Her eyes watered. "That means more than you can imagine." Something akin to regret and gratitude flickered on Thornwood's features. He opened his mouth as though to respond, but no immediate words formed in that hush. It was apparent. The Jack that once shielded him from fatherly attachment had, indeed, eroded, replaced by a budding sense of paternal guilt and perhaps love. Finally, he managed to nod, voice thick. "I'll be more involved, I promise," the Jack. He glanced at Amara with a faint, self-conscious half-smile. "It doesn't bind me anymore." Serena Marlowe nodded, relief shining through fresh tears. She softly excused herself, letting the departing event envelop them. Thornwood's gaze settled on Amara, a swirl of unspoken gratitude and something warmer. He took a measured step forward, ignoring the few lingering staffers clearing the space. "I suppose The Jack was never about never caring, he whispered. It was about never letting myself get hurt, but ironically, not caring caused more hurt than I realized. So thank you for helping me see that she felt her cheeks flush. This was no place for deeply personal confessions, yet the gravity of their closeness overshadowed the hum of cleanup. She slid her hand lightly to his forearm, offering a resolute smile. You found that realization yourself. I just nudged you. He leaned in as though to share a secret. We'll see if the tabloids crucify me, or if Thornwood Sphere's philanthropic success can cushion the fallout. He breathed. Either way, I'm done hiding behind illusions. In that hush, they both understood. The Jack had been shattered for good, replaced by a messy, honest vulnerability that no hush money or strategic vow could contain. The final corners of the atrium were being dismantled, now the lights dimming, staff dispersing. She stepped back to gather, her briefcase heart thrumming with new possibilities. He lingered, scanning the near-empty venue with an almost tender expression, as though seeing potential for love and fatherhood in the same philanthropic project that had once served as a mere PR strategy. When they made their exit side by side, the last photographers snapped a few final pictures, capturing the CEO and his philanthropic manager while Thornwood together, shoulders nearly touching. The Jack that once shaped his identity was gone, and though the road ahead would